welcome to our second in the series, Preparing for Peace of Mind. I am so delighted if this is your second time, and if it's your first, which we got many more that are joining us today, we want to welcome you from American Jewish University and from Hillside. We are so glad you're here. Know that you do not have to take notes, but you can, because this information that you're about to hear is incredibly relevant, incredibly pertinent, and so important. And I'm so grateful that Hillside has given us the privilege to bring it to each and every one of you. Before we even begin with our illustrious speaker today, who I not only get to call a teacher and a friend, I want to start with our word from Hillside, our sponsors, who really brought this incredible vision to life.
Good afternoon. My name is Rafael Ochoa, and I'm the General Manager of Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary. Some of us, if not all of us, have heard the words, "It takes a village." And to all of us at Hillside, this speaks to the importance of community. Support, respect, and tikkun olam. These are just a few of Hillside's deeply rooted core values. As a member of the Los Angeles Jewish community, Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary has been proud to partner with the American Jewish University for 35 years, supporting and encouraging programming for continued Jewish education in the Los Angeles area, and now with Maven throughout the world.
I'm Mari Chernow, Senior Rabbi at Temple Israel of Hollywood. On behalf of Hillside and AJU and TIOH, we're so glad that you're taking the time for this important series. Judaism is a life-loving religion. We affirm life, we celebrate life, we enjoy life. One of the parts of life is the reality of death. It's difficult to talk about. Whatever your Jewish background, we're so glad that you're here to deepen your understanding of this important topic so that we can all be prepared and think about how we want to face the end of life.
On behalf of myself, the entire Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary staff, Temple Israel of Hollywood community, including Hillside Council of Directors, we are proud to support this program and extend our gratitude to Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and Rabbi Elliot Dorff for this presentation. May you and the generations to follow share in the love of family and tradition.
Rafael Ochoa and Rabbi Chernow for those beautiful words. I think they are so true, and we're so grateful to be partnered with you in this journey of preparing for peace of mind. So I can't make this story up. I get a call this morning. Rabbi Hirsch, it's urgent. We are putting together our will, and I need to know about cremation. I was like, wait, was I set up for this? He said, what are you talking about? I said, today at noon, one of the leading minds in this particular area of medical ethics will be in conversation with me, presented by Hillside. You must listen. And so for those of you that are here, you must share this with your friends, because today we are going to discuss some of the most important medical ethical issues around death and dying, from removing life support, cremation, assisted suicide, and organ donation. Now, if for a moment you're like, oh, this is not a really positive topic, this is, as Rabbi Steve Leder said, a sign of choosing life. When we address these conversations head on, when we prepare for them when they're not in need, is the most important preparation. So our guest today on Maven is Rabbi Elliot Dorff, not only the leading thought leader on these issues in matters of life and death, but the author of so many books, I couldn't even recite them all, but the one you need to know is Matters of Life and Death, one of my most favorite books, Preparing for Death, and also his series, Jewish Choices, Jewish Voices, which is so spectacular. I used it as late as yesterday while teaching a class. Currently, he is the chair of the Committee of Law and Standards for the Conservative Movements for 15 years. He served on 3 federal commissions on issues of medical issues, and he's currently serving in the state of California in the issues of medical care. It is my honor, and it is truly a pleasure to be a colleague with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, my very first philosophy teacher. Rabbi Dorff, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So glad you're here. I want to dive right in, because with Rabbi Leder, we talked a lot about preparing for death and what does that mean, and writing an ethical will. And we really want to walk everyone along with Hillside through the journey. Many people face very ethical quandaries as they are dealing with death and dying. So we're going to jump right in. Let's talk about removing life support. Maybe you can give us a case to start out with and then share how does Judaism approach it.
Okay, let me, if I may step back just one step.
Please.
Until very recently in human history, we didn't have these ethical quandaries. This actually goes back to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who pointed out that when you cannot do something, then you never have to ask whether you should. You simply can't. And until very recently in human history, when people were dying, there wasn't really anything that people could do in terms of sustaining that person's life. Actually, medical care until, let's say, the 1960s, for people facing the end of life was at home because the doctors couldn't do anything, except maybe give you some pain medication. And so in terms of the psychological and social pieces of dying, actually our ancestors did it better than we do, because when you died, you were dying at home. And some of you may remember that Jackie Kennedy Onassis, in the last stages of her hospice care, wanted to go back home for it because she wanted to die at home. Whereas we now, because we're able to do so many medical interventions, by and large, the end of life is in a hospital or in hospice or something on that order. So the psychosocial pieces of treating people at the end of life, we do frankly worse than our ancestors did. And that's why an advance directive, an ethical will, visiting the sick, all of these kinds of things, if they were important for our ancestors, they're all the more important now when people who are dying are often not in familiar surroundings. And so it's really important to emphasize that.
Right. How scary it is for people that they're not in familiar surroundings and they're not comfortable. So that importance of visiting the sick and of really being prepared is critical.
Yes, absolutely. Now we are able to sustain people, and thankfully so. I mean, the vast majority of medical interventions that have developed over the last century or so have enabled us. Well, in the year 1900, life expectancy in the United States was 45. In the year 2000, it was 78. So we went from 45 to 78 in 100 years.
Wow.
Most of that is not the medical interventions that we're going to be talking about today. Most of that is public health measures, things like indoor plumbing, things like vaccinations, public health education against smoking and drug and alcohol abuse and things like that. Laws that in California, for example, prohibit you from smoking in any public area, even on Venice Beach these days, right? That because we now know the problems of secondhand smoke as well as the problems of smoking itself, right? So a lot of the reason why we live much longer is because of this kind of public health education. But the fact of the matter is that we do, in the end, we have diseases. Every one of us is mortal, after all, right? We will die of something. And the vast majority of us don't die, of an acute event, a sudden heart attack and you're gone, or a car accident and you're gone. About 85% to 90% of us will die of chronic illnesses rather than of acute events. That means that we'll be living with something for a while, maybe even for decades.
And I want to put a pin in that for a second.
Yeah.
I want to just interrupt you. There's always that ongoing debate if it's better to have someone die in an instant or if it's better to have someone ailing over time. And I hope you'll weigh in on that in a moment once you explain, because that also is a Jewish question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. And we'll get to that issues about assisted suicide, aid and dying. We'll get to that.
Please.
Right? Yes, we will.
I don't mean to be excited about it, but I will just clarify that I'm excited that we're talking about this openly,
Right.
and that Hillside has given us this opportunity.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
forgive me.
Absolutely. So what happens for many of us is that at some point or another, there will be various kinds of medical interventions that we are using, and we're using them in order to live our lives and live our lives as fully as we possibly can. And so before we get to removing this, removing life support and things on that order, let me just say that it is really important to be in touch with your primary care physician, to do what they tell you to do in order to stay healthy. That usually involves exercise and eating properly and sleep. By the way, we are the most sleep deprived society in the world, and that leads to really bad medical conditions, blood pressure et al. Right? So it's really important to live your life in as healthy a way as possible for as long as possible. That said, at some point, many people are on various kinds of machines. And usually, and those machines were invented, things like heart-lung machines, kidney dialysis machines, these kinds of things, ventilators. Very often, these machines were intended for short-term care. But once you have them, again, Kant, once you are able to, then you have to ask whether you should use these machines for the long term.
So let me just keep people apprised. So I don't want them to get lost, because you're such an intellectual, you're such a mind. And for us little lay people that are just trying to understand, basically, these machines were developed for short-term care, but now you have the option of using them for long-term sustainment. And
That's
so
right.
now we have the dilemma: when do you remove these machines that were never intended for long-term care? And we all have heard of stories of people that are on machines for a year or 2 years or even longer.
Or in
So
Terry
what does
Schiavo's,
Judaism say?
right, or in Terry Schiavo's case, 14 years.
Wow.
Yes. So the issue really becomes very acute. Namely, is it in the best interest of the patient? What about the family? What about who's paying for all of this? As a society, we have to address these issues, as well as individuals and as families. But let's stick to the individual patient for the moment. So in the Jewish tradition, well, let me just say, in American law, starting with the Nancy Cruzan decision of 1990, the Supreme Court ruled that adults, not true for children, but adults 18 and over, may refuse any medical intervention. That doesn't mean that you have the right to demand it, but it does mean that you have the right to refuse it. So you can, and that included machines, medications, and also artificial nutrition and hydration. Sometimes when people cannot eat and drink on their own, often when they're comatose or something on that order, or when they have esophageal cancer or something on that order, the doctors will use what's called artificial nutrition and hydration. That is, they will put the least invasive way of doing that is putting a tube through your nose into your stomach, a nasogastric tube, right? But that's not comfortable because you have a coughing mechanism in your throat. So even if you're comatose, if your upper brain is not working, but you're still alive, your brainstem, which controls your heartbeat and your breath and things like that, that's still going, right? So when doctors put in this NG tube, this nasogastric tube, very often people try to pull it out. So even if the person is comatose, often doctors have to tie the person's hands to the bed so they don't pull out the tube.
Oh my God,
right?
We could talk about just this one issue. So I really want to hone in for a second. So I'm a listener. I have a family member who's on life support. They've been on for a while. They said, go to any lengths to keep me alive. And you are watching as this family member who loves this person very deeply, and you see no hope, and you see them literally sustained by this life support. What does Judaism say?
Okay. So what does Judaism say? Of course, you're talking about Jews,
I know that, but
right?
I'm
Let me
asking for
give
the
you,
listener like us.
that's fine. So let me give you the spectrum, okay? On the very sort of right end of the spectrum, if I may, is Rabbi J. David Blake. He's an Orthodox rabbi at Yeshiva University. He would say we must intervene in any way we need to in order to sustain a person's life, and we may never withdraw it until the person dies, right? So you need to attach whatever you need to attach to the person, use whatever medications you need until the person dies of natural causes.
And as you mentioned, that can be a tircha, a burden,
Oh,
financially, emotionally. I mean, there's so many iterations of that. And
That's
then on
right.
the other side of the spectrum,
Oh, hold on just a minute. Moving down a little bit to the left, still within the Orthodox world, is Rabbi Moshe Tendler. Also, Alav Shalom, he just passed away recently, but he was a rabbi and a biologist at Yeshiva University. He would say that you do not have to, you do not have to intubate. You don't have to put tubes into people, but once you do that, you may not withdraw them. Okay, you may withhold, but you may not withdraw. Okay, and that is the position of a lot of the American Orthodox community. Moving a little bit to the left is Rabbi Emanuel Jakubowicz, who was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the first person to write a book on Jewish medical ethics back in 1959. I heard him give a talk to doctors at Cedars-Sinai in the early 1980s, in which he said, this has been when the heart-lung machine had just come on, he said, if you examine the patient and you think that it's not working for the benefit of the patient anymore, this machine, you may turn off the machine. However, if you doctors have compunctions about that, then put the machine on a timer, let's say for 24 hours, and then come back 23 hours later, examine the patient. If you still think that it's not to the benefit of the patient to keep the person on the machine, again, you may turn off the machine. But if you don't want to, just walk out of the room and let the machine turn off, let the timer turn off the machine, right? That's what happens at Shaarei Tzedek in Israel and in most of Israeli Orthodox understandings of things, that you may both withhold and also withdraw machines and medications when
So
they are
basically the tradition found a loophole by setting a timer and then walking away, kind of like when you light the Shabbat candles, you close your eyes and they're there.
Yes, that's
so you're
right.
not violating Shabbat. I mean, it
Right.
feels a little bit uncomfortable, I
Disingenuous?
would say. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Well, and frankly, I mean, we'll get to my position in just a moment. Moving a little bit to the left is Rabbi Avram Reisner. We're now in the conservative movement. He and I both wrote rabbinic rulings about end-of-life issues in 1990, the same year that the Supreme Court ruled on these issues. He would say, we agree on most of the issues. We agree that you may both withhold and withdraw machines and medications, but he would say, but not artificial nutrition and hydration. So that in the Terry Schiavo case, where she was on artificial nutrition and hydration for 14 years, he would say that she still should be on it for as long as she needs to be on it until she dies of natural causes. Whereas I would say, and what I say, that nutrition hydration is, and by the way, the reason for it is because it functions in the way that food and liquids function. It gives people the food and liquids that they need. And so he says that because we need that, every human being needs that throughout life, we must provide that, and we may never remove that, if that's what a person needs in order to live. Whereas I say that really is medication, because it doesn't come into the body the way that food and liquids normally do, namely by putting it in your mouth and chewing if you need to and swallow, right? It comes through tubes, the nasogastric tube that I was just describing, and once that doesn't work, they will use intravenous tubes, but then you get blotches all over because your veins are not really intended for that kind of an invasion. And then afterward, they'll actually do surgery into your intestine in order to be able to provide this. So then that's an open wound, right? So we're not talking about simple things here. We're talking about things with major medical pain, frankly, often, and certainly discomfort. But he would. So I would say that this is machines. This is medication, I should say, not really. Even though it's functioning in place of food and water, and therefore you may remove that as well, which is what the Supreme Court said a little bit later that year, and which the Ethics Committee of the American Medical Association says as well, namely that artificial nutrition and hydration is to be treated like all other medications, and therefore it may be used if it's to the benefit of the patient, but it also may be withheld or withdrawn. Okay. Now moving to, so that's where I am, okay, on those issues. And thankfully it's where I'm glad to say the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with me, although they didn't know about what I had.
That's a good place to be with.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the American Medical Association Ethics Committee believes that as well. Now there are those, we then get to the next stage, which is much more difficult. Namely, what about assisting a suicide, right? Until now, we're talking about letting what's sometimes called passive euthanasia. That is simply stepping aside and letting nature take its course, okay? Providing palliative care. This is what's called
removing
hospice.
the obstacles.
That's right, removing the obstacles to death and dying, which is, by the way, where the Shulchan Aruch is. The Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law written in the 16th century, says that you may not hasten a person's dying process, but on the other hand, you may remove impediments to the dying process, right? So that's what Rabbi Jacobovitz was doing when he was talking to the doctors at Cedars, namely, you may turn off the machine because that's an impediment to the natural dying process of this patient, right? And the particular cases we're talking about. But what about assisting a suicide? This gets very problematic very fast, right? And actually in 1997, I wrote a rabbinic ruling for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards saying that we should not do that. Even though I'm more liberal than Rabbi Reisner on removing life support, I would not engage in assisted suicide for several reasons. Number one, people who are considering suicide often have clinical depression. So then what you should do is treat the depression rather than try to assist the person to commit suicide. I was actually on a book project in the early 1990s about suicide. And one of the people who were organizing the book project brought the authors together. And one of the people that we interviewed was a 36-year-old man who had AIDS. Now, the cocktail of treating AIDS didn't come in until 1996 or so. So this man was looking at some of his friends who had died of AIDS, and it wasn't pretty, to put it mildly. And so he had bought himself a .22 caliber pistol, loaded it, or at least he thought he had, clicked the revolver, and it didn't work, didn't go off. And at that moment, one of his friends came by, saw what he was planning on doing, and set up a 24/7 accompaniment for him, right? Now, we were talking to him about a year later, and we were asking him, do you want to still commit suicide? And I'll never forget his answer. His answer was, my friends don't want me to. Now, what that means is that often people who want to commit suicide do so because they don't think anybody else cares. That's why visiting the sick is so important, right? Even if they're not, people are not thinking about suicide, because we are social animals after it's all said and done. And the way that we get a sense of why it matters for us to live is because other people are around us and are interacting with us. And if that's not happening, then people very often think, well, it's just not worth living with whatever pain and discomfort I have. So that's one reason why I was against assisted suicide. We should treat the depression, including not just medical treatments, but social treatments, visiting the sick and making sure that people know that it's really important that you live for them, right? Another reason why I was against assisted suicide was money. Money complicates everything, right? Mom is dying, and she does not want to waste the family resources on her futile medical care. So she wants to die. She wants assistance, and she wants assistance in suicide so that she doesn't squander the family fortune.
Right. It's not driven by her will. It's driven by her character of wanting to take care of the future progeny of her children.
That's right. Or worse, mom is dying and her children don't want her to squander the family fortune because they want to inherit it, right? So they don't want, they're perfectly happy. And by the way, not just for children, your insurance company would be more than happy to help you commit suicide rather than pay for long-term healthcare insurance, right? Because paying for long-term healthcare insurance is really expensive and helping you die is not.
So wait, bottom line on this one, just as
So
a Jew,
So for these reasons, I in 1997 wrote a tshuva saying that we should not allow assisted suicide, we should not assist a suicide, and we should do everything we can to try to help people who are thinking about it decide to do otherwise, right? Decide to continue living, right? That's what I wrote in 1997. I still believe that for the vast majority of cases in which people are contemplating suicide.
and what do you say to the people that the person truly has gone through psychological evaluation, who really is suffering, does not? And what do you say to all the doctors who literally say that the hospital assisted suicide happens every day, we just don't talk about it?
Okay, so now several things have happened that led me to write another rabbinic ruling for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. It's called Assisted Suicide / Aid in Dying Revisited. And the reason why, I did this in 2019. And the reason why I did it, there are two reasons why I did it. First of all, in 1997, assisting a suicide was not legal in any part of the United States. So even if Jewish law would have permitted it, it was irrelevant because American law did not. Now, California is among 8 states and also the District of Columbia that allows assisted suicide. So does Canada, so do certain European.
Right, in Canada, I think it's called medical assistance in
That's right,
dying.
it's called medical aid in dying.
Yes,
Right?
Anita Rudolph, thank you for that tip.
That's right, because the reason is because, and what I do in this tshuva, in this rabbinic ruling, is I compare the California rule as opposed to the Canadian rule, because there are more or less the same number of Jews in both places, by the way, in Canada and California, and the populations are more or less similar. And the Canadian law and the California law came into being within 2 weeks of each other in 2016. The difference, the major difference between them is that Canada allows the physician not only to prescribe the medications needed to die, but allows the physician to administer those medications. Whereas in California, the doctor, with a number of precautions here, right? There have to be 2 doctors that agree that the person, cannot be relieved of pain with any of the ways that we have of doing so. That the person is mentally competent. So somebody who's comatose in California is not eligible for it's called the End of Life Option Act, is not able to take advantage of that act. So it's only people who are mentally competent who are able to do that. They have to ask for it orally, in the original legislation, a month apart, and then in writing. That has been revised somewhat recently, so it's within a couple of days of each other. They have to ask twice orally for medical aid in dying, and then they have to do it themselves. They have to administer the medications themselves. So not surprisingly, in 2019, 3 years after these laws came into effect in Canada and in California, there were many more cases of this in Canada than there were in California, right? Because in Canada, the doctor can do it, whereas in California, you have to do it if you want to do it for yourself, right? The other thing I think that's important to note here is that back in 1990, back in the early 1990s, there were 2 cases. One that came before the Ninth Circuit of the Supreme Court, came from the state of Washington, and one that came before the Second Circuit in New York, which wanted to claim that there should be a constitutional right to commit suicide and to have assistance in committing suicide. And the Ninth Circuit agreed and said that there is that kind of constitutional right based upon the Liberty Clause of the 14th Amendment. And the Second Circuit said that there should be a constitutional right to have aid in dying, based upon the equal liberty, equal treatment clause of the equal rights of the 14th Amendment. The point being that if you're allowed to commit suicide yourself, you should be able to get assistance in doing it. The Supreme Court, however, ruled 9-0 that this was not a constitutional right. This was up to the states. So that's when Oregon passed. Oregon was the first state to pass a legislation that allowed for assisted suicide in one form or another, and then 7 other states followed suit over a period of time. And one needs to understand that so that one thing that had changed in 2019 from what I had written in 1997 was that now it was legal in several jurisdictions. So it was at least something we had to address. Should Jews do it? The fact that things are legal doesn't mean that Jews should do them.
Right. And I think that's such an important point for people to hear. And I mean, you're just like this, you're mind blowing me right now, but just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's recommended in Jewish law. And I want to just pause because I know we could talk forever. I want to say a couple things. One, that please bring your questions. Please put them in the Q&A because I'm going to open it up for questions in just a few moments. We haven't even gotten to cremation and organ donation, which I anticipated. I also want to say that Hillside has been so generous in supporting this. I hope that you will go and learn more because they have lots of resources. And if you have an interest in learning all of the details, because I think Rabbi Dorff, this is a course. I mean, this is incredible. Like, this is much bigger than like 45 minutes, and I'm embarrassed giving you only that. Please let us know because we would love to offer it as a curriculum, even a 3-part series where we address each of these topics in more and where you'll have an opportunity to go back and forth. So we left off. I just want to make sure we touch upon cremation and organ donation, but let's finish with assisted suicide or assisted.
Okay. So the other thing I think that really motivated me to write this Reconsidered is my daughter-in-law is an oncologist, and she said that in the vast majority of cases that she has seen, she's been at it for about 20 years now, doctors were able to quell pain. But in 3 cases that she could remember very vividly, she said, these patients literally screamed their way to death. So it's clearly there are cases, bone cancer is one example of that. There are cases in which the doctors are not always able to quell pain. And in those kinds of cases, it seemed to me that those are the ones that we always think of, those are the pure cases, as it were, where aid and dying seems to be legitimate. So I wrote this tshuva that would say, in those kinds of cases only, right, after you have tried to treat depression, both medically and socially, after you have dealt with whatever the monetary issues are, right? After you've dealt with any other kinds of issues that are leading the person to want to commit suicide, and you understand that that's not the case. By the way, what about being paraplegic or something?
Right. And I was going to say, I'm going to interrupt you. A lot of people are weighing in like, that was not the situation for me, or that wasn't the situation for me. And I want to just reiterate, every situation, as a rabbi, I can say of 25 years, every situation is entirely unique. And this is not a platform statement. This is Rabbi Dorff giving us sort of the halachic, the legal understanding of what does this mean for us as Jews. So can we pivot for a second to cremation? Because people want to know,
Yes.
Can you be buried in a Jewish cemetery? What does it mean if you've been cremated? Also, in the same vein, if you've been assisted in suicide, can you be buried in a Jewish cemetery, which really goes to Hillside and their openness and what they offer. So please tell us about cremation. Is it allowed?
From the point of view of Jewish law, no, it's not allowed.
Okay, so no, but I can
hold on,
tell
just a
you and
moment.
you can tell me, many people have been cremated that I've officiated a ceremony for.
Yes, so it's not allowed. And after the Germans the Nazis did to us what they did with the gas chambers, especially in these generations after the Holocaust, it really is very problematic, frankly. Okay, it is, however, cheaper. And so therefore, some people are getting cremated for that reason. And some people are getting cremated because they think it's environmentally better, although frankly, it is environmentally worse because it requires a lot of energy to cremate. and that puts a lot of pollution into the air. And beyond that, there is now green. What we do as Jews is really green burial, because we don't bury in iron caskets that don't degrade. We bury in wooden caskets that are biodegradable. And so the kind of burial that the Jewish tradition requires of us is in fact green burial. So the environmental reason doesn't really work very well. That said, two things you need to know. Number one, I'm a past president of Jewish Family Service in Los Angeles, which began in 1854. And among the very first services it gave in connection with the Jewish mortuaries in town and the Jewish cemeteries in town was free or at least subsidized burial for Jews who cannot afford it. So rather than cremate, if money is the issue, then contact Jewish Family Service, which basically works with the cemeteries in town, including Hillside, and to find out really whether you can contribute to the cost of the burial, because after all,
so for the person, it's not just, this is not a money issue. It's not just the association with the Nazi one, which I think is an incredibly powerful image. But even before that, Jewish law doesn't let you cremate. Why? Because your body, in the Jewish tradition, your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God. And so you have a fiduciary relationship to take care of your body throughout your lifetime, right? That's why, and even if you're allowed to smoke under certain circumstances or allowed to abuse alcohol legally in America, you're not supposed to do that if you're a Jew, because you have to take care of your body. For that matter, essentially the body's a rental. That's right. Right? It's a rental. That's right. It's a rental. You wouldn't take a rental car and explode it and say, actually, I'm done with the rental. That's right. Right? You would return it. That's right. You have literally, using this terminology, which I do in my book, you have a lease on life. Okay. And that lease, it depends upon you're taking care of your body. So here's my Achilles heel. I don't smoke and I don't really like alcohol that much, but ice cream. Oh, wow. If I could eat a half a gallon of ice cream every night of the week, and if I'm doing it, it might as well be mint chocolate chip or Cherry Garcia. That stuff is so good. Anyway, if I could do that, completely with you, just not Cherry Garcia. In American law, there's nothing that prohibits me from doing that. But in Jewish law, I'm not allowed to do that because I have to take care of my body, which belongs to God. That's what it means to have a fiduciary. That is, God trusts you to take care of your body. So you do not have the right to injure your body, let alone destroy it. That's the reason why cremation is not allowed. That's also the reason why we have to take care of ourselves and try to stay as healthy as we can, right? Even if you don't want to, you have a duty to do that in Jewish law because your body belongs to God. What about the people that get cremated and then they have a burial of their cremated remains? So the Jewish law does allow the burial of they're called cremains. I know, cremains is a new word I learned. That's right, after the fact. So the Jewish cemeteries in town will bury cremains, okay? But again, I would really discourage you from cremating cremating family members. You're doing what the Nazis did to them, right? Or having yourself cremated after death, right? Have yourself buried in the traditional Jewish way. And if money is an issue, talk to Jewish Family Service about it. Right, and I also was going to say you should always talk to whatever funeral provider, mortuary provider, but Hillside has a very extensive counseling program to help people navigate these decisions where they have rabbis literally weigh in and help you, guide you through this process. We have a question about, and I don't know about this, Aquamation, which is using water and sodium hydroxide. I was like, of course you know about it, but is that a Jewish permitted tradition, and what does it mean? Okay, so there actually is a rabbinic ruling about this by Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky. If anybody wants it, I can send you the link to that, in which he talks about this, because there are certain places, like, for example, New Orleans, where the water table is right up to where the land is. And so for generations already, burial has been in the ground and then they remove it right away because otherwise it would simply be liquidated. And what he goes through
is, it's a very good tshuva. What he goes through is the various ways in which people's bodies may be buried burial in the ground is one, burial in a mausoleum is the second. Then aquafication is what he talks about there as well, right? Which is, it's not the preferred option, but it is better than cremation. And you can see there, it's a process that has not been around for very long. That's the reason why our codes don't talk about it, right? But it is frankly a better option than cremation.
But of course, the codes of Jewish law don't talk about aquamation.
Absolutely
They didn't
not.
have any idea of what that is. We
That's
are
right.
actually running out of time, and the questions just keep coming in fast and furious, which indicates to me we're going to have a full nother conversation about this. But I did want to touch upon organ donation because there is a fair amount of questions while we have you. I feel like we have the expert. We have to ask him everything. What is the Jewish position on literally signing that card that says, God forbid something happens to me, our organs will be used in the way that they see fit?
You have a duty to sign it, okay?
Mm.
And because certainly if you're talking about cadaveric donation, right? In other words, from a cadaver, from a dead body, then because see, the other issue is that saving people's lives takes precedence over most other laws in Judaism, including the burial laws, right? So if you should definitely sign it and make sure your family knows that you want to be an organ donor. When I talk to Jewish audiences about this, some people almost inevitably say, "But what about resurrection of the dead?" Well, first of all, you need to, don't you have to be resurrected whole? Well, let me just tell you that first of all, Saadia Gaon believes in physical resurrection.
Saadia Gaon, philosopher, commentator.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Of the 10th.
I just want to give context for not everybody
right.
who is, I don't know, has a JD, a rabbinic, an MD.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Maimonides of the 12th century does not believe in physical resurrection, right? So even in the Middle Ages, there's a debate among Jews as to whether there is such a thing as physical resurrection. But even if there is, you don't want to be resurrected in the body in which you died. That didn't serve you very well in the end. Now, if I'm going to be resurrected the next time around, I'm an Olympic swimmer. Okay, God's going to have to do a lot of plastic surgery on you, right, in order to resurrect you. So you don't have to worry about losing parts of your body once you've died in order to help somebody live, even while alive. This is especially for kidney donation. There you really do have to make sure that it is safe for you to do that. And doctors will only do a kidney transplant and take from somebody for whom it is safe. But I belong to Temple Beth Am. Devorah Coker, a past president of Temple Beth Am, was a living donor of a kidney to her daughter, who had kidney failure when she was 30. The daughter lived on that for about another 10 years. Devorah is still alive and kicking, thank God, in her late 80s. So yes, if you're talking about a living donor, then you just have to make sure that it's safe for the donor, right? But if you're talking about somebody who has died, and once you have died, you need to do that. I was at a conference about organ donation. A woman got up and put a picture of a young guy in front of her. She said, "That was my son. He died at age 20 in a car accident. Thankfully, my older children gave us had the presence of mind of convincing my husband and me to make him a donor." And she knew that 5 different people were living as a result of his organ donations, right? The kidneys,
There was
the
a
lungs.
movie about that, which was so beautiful.
Yes. So by all means, sign the back of do whatever you need for your driver's license, and make sure your family knows that when you die, you want to be an organ donor. And by the way, they do that very quickly after you die. And so it doesn't delay burial at all.
So more questions are coming in about above ground burial, about burial in a vault. I think that's the same thing, but maybe not.
Yes, yeah.
About human composting. I never even heard of that. There are so many ethical issues around this. And I want to say a couple of things. First of all, the in summary, on organ donation, that's a hard yes, do that.
Yes.
In assisted suicide, little complicated. There's a huge spectrum, and we need to figure out where you land on the spectrum, but your position is the one that aligns with the Supreme Court. On cremation.
So, no, that was in regard to removal of life support.
Oh, removal of life support. I'm sorry.
That's right. In regard to aid in dying, only if they cannot control the pain otherwise.
Only if they cannot control the pain otherwise. And cremation, strongly encouraged because it's not in Jewish law, because your body is not your own. I cannot believe that we went through 4 of the most powerful ethical issues in literally the last hour. But I want to say a couple things to all of you. First of all, there are so many questions, and each one of these is a very, very nuanced discussion that needs to take place with your rabbi, with the mortuary, and with your family members. The reason we're running this series with Hillside, Preparing for Peace of Mind, is because having these questions in your head does not bring you peace. It actually brings you discord. So let this be the jumping off point to have these difficult conversations, which I actually don't think was so difficult. You must read Matters of Life and Death.
Yes, you may want to look at this book.
Yes, it's actually on my bookshelf. And I refer to it all the time. And I have so many books of yours, of Rabbi Dorff, of conservative Judaism. I have so many books that you've written. You've been such an inspiration in my own rabbinate and taught me so much. I want to especially thank Hillside. I want people to reach out to their rabbis, to their friends, to have these difficult conversations. Reach out to Hillside, as they are so knowledgeable on all of this. And please let us know if you loved this and you'd like to see more of this conversation. I'd love to engage Rabbi Dorff in a more extensive conversation where we address each of these issues. And I want to thank Hillside especially. Thank you, Rabbi Dorff. As always, it's true honor.
Pleasure.